All right, if you want, go ahead and open up your Bibles to Luke chapter 14. We'll be looking at this chapter in its entirety today. And then just from a preparation standpoint for Wednesday, we'll be looking at Luke chapter 15, the full chapter there. So we left off at the end of chapter 13, or what was maybe a better way to phrase this question, but what was the key overarching theme or command, like we talked about, that came out of chapter 13? Yeah, repent, right? And when should you repent? While you've got time to do it, right?
Every day.
Yeah, every day. You know, while you've got time to do it, you need to make the most of that time. That was kind of
repent as soon as you've done it.
right. Yeah. Chapter 12 left off. Where you know what's coming. If somebody's dragging you before the judge to pay a debt, you know what's going to happen by the time you get there. So use the time between here and there to get that sorted out, and then you use those different, recent tragedies that have befallen people, not only kind of on the outskirts in Galilee, but also even in Jerusalem itself, to stress our mortality, and then this can come at any minute, and then you don't need to be like the barren fig tree who's had time after time after time after time to get it right, but like Mike mentioned, there's the axe is at the root of the tree. The vineyard keeper says, I'll give it one more year, give it one more year, but there's a time coming when the master's ultimately going to close that gate of the narrow way. So using the opportunities that we have in front of us, making the most of them, making most of the time that we have to set things right ultimately with God. And that kind of lends itself decently well transitioning into chapter 14, because you'll get some more of these themes, but really peeling the onion back a little bit more, we'll be really focusing in on humility, what humility looks like for a disciple of Christ. All right, and what is a disciple? I know we've quoted from Luke chapter 6, verse 40, which says what?
Follower of his teachers.
Yeah. What does Luke 6:40 say? That is the first answer to the question. Luke 6:40.
A disciple is not about his master, but when he is fully taught, he will be like his master.
Exactly. A disciple or a teacher, that's what a disciple is a student of a master, of a teacher. When they are perfectly trained, they will be like their master, right? And so we ultimately, everyone in this room is striving to be like our master Christ. We are disciples of, we are students of Christ in an attempt to ultimately, when we become perfected in that, or when the fullness of that has come, we will be like him. And what is, we've talked about this a little bit before too, but starting in Luke chapter 9, verse 51, up through Luke chapter 19, so we're right in the middle of it, but what's going on in this time period in the Gospel of Luke? What's Jesus doing? Yeah, he set his face in Luke chapter 9, verse 51, towards Jerusalem. And so we have this Jerusalem journey narrative where really, Christ paints a picture, and Luke is painting a picture for Theophilus, for someone who's weighing the pros and the cons of what ultimately am I buying into when I pledge my allegiance to this king, Jesus. What does that look like? And Jesus is saying, it's a journey. It is a journey that you set your face towards something, towards the end goal, and you've got to steadfastly set your face there, because there's going to be bumps, bruises, heartache, and trouble along the way. And so a lot of that's going to come up in our study of Luke chapter 14, which is right in the middle of this journey narrative. But you get more aspects of what that journey is and what we are called to be like on such a journey. Just a quick review, just in case we don't get to all the points. I hope we will, but just kind of a high level overview of what is included in chapter 14. I mentioned, it got sort of bleak and a lot of the bleak and maybe harsh in some of the criticisms that Jesus was leveling, and some of the calls to action that Jesus was leveling back in chapter 13. It gets a little more awkward in chapter 14 when Jesus ruins a dinner party that he gets invited to. It makes some very uncomfortable and awkward statements. People try to maybe help him get out of it, but he digs further in and makes it even more awkward, as we'll see. It starts off with I think this is the third instance of a healing on the Sabbath. It comes with a lesson and a point in what the Sabbath is ultimately supposed to be about, what its main thrust even was. And then some general conventional wisdom on seating strategies when you get to a party, what might be best for you to do there. But then some kind of contra to that, anti-conventional wisdom on invitation strategies. Right? Everybody can buy into the first part, yeah, that makes sense. But the second part, I don't get that one. And then the parable of the great banquet feast in verses 15 through 24, where Jesus is going to be talking about who's going to be ultimately included at this great banquet, this feast, this kingdom festival that God is setting up and inviting everyone to. Who's actually going to be there, and what does that look like? Then he transitions from that, or uses that to springboard to this idea in the last 11 verses of the cost of discipleship, right? So there is a cost to be taken into account, to consider before you set out on this journey. But more than just evaluating whatever that cost is, has to be what is the value of the end goal, right? Anytime you make any sort of transaction or a business deal, it's not just what am I giving up, it's what am I getting in return, right? I mean, what is the value of the thing that I'm actually purchasing here, giving up here? And so the same holds true with this valuation of the cost of discipleship. What is the end goal of that journey and where we're setting our eyes? By the end of that, it's a bargain, right? When you actually take that into account, it makes all the sense in the world. But what might that look like even between here and there? And so that's kind of what we'll be looking at as we make our way through chapter 14 this morning. Let's read the first 6 verses together. So this is, like I mentioned, yet another of a Sabbath healing that Jesus is going to be kind of illustrating something to the rulers, the Pharisees, the ones who ultimately should have known better. It says, now it happened as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath, that they watched him closely. And behold, there was a certain man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus, answering, spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? But they kept silent. And he took him, and he healed him, and he let him go. And he answered them, saying, which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they could not answer him regarding these things. All right, so this is very, very similar to the instance of the healing that we just read about right back in the previous chapter, in Luke chapter 13, where Jesus healed the woman in the synagogue while he was teaching on the Sabbath. Here he's been invited into one of the ruler's house to take place in this Sabbath meal. And it says that they were watching him closely. What do you think they're watching him closely for? What does that kind of say about this whole event? What's that?
They can't stand him.
They can't stand him, sure. But they invited him to a party. What?
It almost feels like another possible staged situation. Like previously he was invited to a ruler and the immoral woman was there. And the guy was thinking, surely if he was, a prophet, he would know this is an immoral woman. And here they're all eyeing him to see his behavior. And there just happens to be a man with dropsy there before him.
Yeah.
That's not, just random, right?
No, I think you're exactly right. Did I hear someone else starting to say something as well?
Just said it was a setup.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a setup again. That this is having this man with this affliction at a party of a ruler of the Pharisee house just kind of almost already seems a little unlikely, a little out of place. But it says that they're there and they're watching him closely. I think that's just an interesting point to pull out, even in this first section. They're watching him so closely and still see nothing. Right? They've got their paradigm already set up. They've got their viewpoint of who Christ is, what God is, maybe more broadly, and this isn't it, right? And so they're watching him closely, but they aren't seeing anything. And so Jesus uses the opposite, like it says here in verse 3, that he's answering them. What was the question that was asked? Jesus is answering. Now that's the kind of lens into that setup aspect, right? I know exactly what we're trying to do. So here's the answer in the form of a question. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? What's the answer to that question?
No response.
Yeah, and their answer, or their response is they keep silent. right? They're watching, they've got ideas, but they don't say anything. Yeah, that's just, kind of very stereotypical of what we've seen about the Pharisees thus far in the book, or in the gospel, but how close does that hit home to us? Right? We've got our ideas, we've got our thoughts, we've got our paradigm set up, but we really don't do anything about it. We just, even with that, we just sit there and we just be quiet just to see what else other people might do. I find that fascinating. Of course, Jesus is a master of controlling these situations, and he does it so well again here. But I think even from a Pharisaical standpoint, he touched on this when we were in chapter 13, their oral traditions around the law had carve-outs, had exceptions to what work was on the Sabbath, and those included, getting an animal out of a ditch or letting it loose to go, feed it or take it to water so that it could drink. Because that's cruel, that's inhumane to treat a creature of God's that way just because it's the Sabbath. So yeah, clearly that's not a violation. But here, healing a man, and like we talked about in chapter 13, loosing them of their affliction that Satan has bound them with, this is the perfect day to do these types of things. And ultimately the answer to the question that Jesus has in verse 4, he took him and he healed him and he let him go. He wouldn't be able to do that if it was outside of what God wanted for him, right? I mean, he wouldn't have the power, the authority to even do this healing if that was against God's will. So that's a proof and a stamp of approval right in front of them. But again, they're watching closely and not seeing, right? Even that this miracle takes place right in front of them, and they keep silent. They've got nothing else to say. Jesus expounds on it very again, similar to what he did back in chapter 13, and they could not answer. There is no answer but to fall down at his feet and worship him. That they're not doing. So there is no other answer. There is no response. But as he's there at this party, and again, he's made it awkward already, right, by performing this healing and stepping on the toes of his invited, or of his hosts. So he sees them jockeying for position, right? He sees everybody when they got to the party, and the way that these, gatherings like this in the ancient Near East would take place is be like a U-shaped table where the hosts or the guests of honor would be kind of at the pinnacle of that. And then like it was an honor system, not in that sense, but an honor ranking system kind of falling of the most honored guest to the least on the outer portions of the table. And so when people would get there, you're supposed to know your position socially, right? Like there are even instances outside of non-biblical commentaries around this time frame where even guests of honor or maybe a higher social status would get to a party late because that's where they kind of like you got to be socially acceptably late to a party. Like the more honor you had, the later you could be to the party because your seat was still there, because that you were supposed to be sitting in this valued, coveted seat, and so they kept it open for you. But I know one story I read of a guy showing up late to a party, looking around the room and saying, "My seat's not here." I see some seats at the end of the table, but I'm not doing that, and so he leaves. Right? And so there was this, when you got to the party, you were supposed to have an understanding of where you were supposed to be. But these guys apparently show up to this party that Jesus is invited to, this Sabbath dinner, and they're immediately jockeying for position, trying to get the most coveted, most honorable seats. And so he sees that and kind of takes from it an abject lesson for them to study. So he says he told a parable to those who were invited, when he noted how they chose the best places. And he said to them, "When you're invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one who is more honorable than you be invited by him. And when he who invited you and this more honorable person come to you and say, 'Give place to this man,' and then you begin with shame to have to take the lowest place. But instead, when you're invited, go sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, go up higher,' and then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." All right. So is Jesus' point here just giving you instruction on how to maybe socially handle a party? Google what to do at a party. What to do at a party when you get there. Is that what Jesus' point here is? There is some conventional wisdom, though, in it, isn't there? I mean, everybody can hear this, and would anybody just on the face of what's said here, even from a like social party-going practice, disagree with that statement? Does it sound like a pretty good idea? Like just, hey, it'd be pretty awkward if I took that high honored position and the guy who invited me says, hey, you're not the most honored person here. You need to scooch down a couple of seats because I got this guy who he's more honorable. He needs to have this seat. So why don't you scoot on down? That'd be pretty awkward, right?
Who of us can't relate to the best and the lowest?
Exactly. Yeah. This is it's conventional wisdom. This statement just outside of anything spiritual makes sense, right? If you, and by extension, taking the lower seat, man, how awesome would that be if you purposefully took this lower seat and the big wigs, the big shakers and movers show up and be like, dude, come up here and sit next to me over here, this position of prominence. That'd be great. Right? Everybody can grasp that, understand it, and appreciate it. But obviously there's a spiritual mindset behind just this party-going tactics that Jesus is laying out. And it's its crux there in verse 11. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And you can't be self-seeking in the way you ultimately go about things, because you'll get what's coming to you if you do. The reverse is is just as true as well. That he who humbles himself in life from a spiritual standpoint will be exalted. All right, so the conventional wisdom aspect from it, just again, the statement as it is, makes sense to everybody. And what doesn't make sense is the next one, right? Because everybody can appreciate, okay, I'm going to play this little game when I get to the party, that I'll be the benefactor of taking the lower seat if I get rewarded for it. But when you throw a party, right, what's the whole point in throwing a party? Have fun. Let people see how fun you are, right? I want you to come into my house and you can see how awesome I am when I'm not uptight and teaching class or something. Right? But I want you to see how great I am, how enjoyable I am, how generous I am with me even having a party and inviting you scrubs, and you get to come and see how great being around me really is. Right? That's what it's for. A party's to show off. A party's to rub elbows with the elite and hopefully, kind of get some kickback for it, at the end. Whether they invite you back to have a party at their house, or you make some connection, you make some relationship that could benefit you. I mean, that's what parties are for, right? So the first part makes sense. This part, socially, not so much. He says when you have a party, and you have a dinner or supper, don't ask your friends, don't ask your brothers, don't ask your relatives, don't ask your rich neighbors, because they might invite you back, and then you'll be repaid. So, again, is there anything wrong with inviting your family over to your house on Thanksgiving? Is that the point? Sometimes maybe there's something wrong with that.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, I'll be done in a couple of weeks if everything's wrong with that. Well, the point is, there's nothing morally, like this face value, maybe there is with your whole situation, but there's nothing morally outstanding about inviting people that you were already going to invite anyway, right? There's nothing morally commendable about doing something like that. But if you're doing it in a sense and in a circumstance where you're not going to get anything back, and instead you invite people who have no chance to pay you back or to return the favor in kind. You invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, because then if you do that, you'll be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So the point is, again, that loving and hosting those that you love or your friends or your colleagues already is not inherently morally commendable. It's not inherently good in and of itself. But true righteousness doesn't look for any kind of payback, right? Doesn't look for any kind of kickback from what it's ultimately doing. Again, if our whole intent of studying through this gospel is to see Christ and to become a pupil or a student of His, to be like Him, what's He looking for in return from leaving His throne on high and coming down and messing with us in the muck and the mire? What's in it for Him? Nothing. Just apart from gathering more to Himself, He doesn't get to reap any benefits of just slumming it with us. So, again, the concept of us wanting to be like Christ, we should do likewise and not live our lives jockeying for position or just trying to do things that ultimately benefit ourselves, but are going to benefit other people, right? Because when you're benefiting these other people, there's the likelihood that maybe they can't pay you back. Most likely they can't, but maybe they can return the same in kind to somebody else even lower than their station. And it's just this trickle-down effect, because the kingdom, as we looked in chapter 13, is like a little bit of leaven in 50 pounds of flour. It's going to take over the whole thing. And this is how it works when it functions this way. Again, you see this played out exactly in Acts, right, with the early church of looking out for one another, and it just grows and it expands. The mustard seed becomes this great tree. The leaven fills the whole lump, and it takes off and does what it's supposed to do. But again, kind of the conventional wisdom aspect of the first one, that makes sense. So he grabs him in, he ropes him in with the idea that, yeah, that makes sense. I'll try that the next time I go to a party. Then he reverses it and says, well, now you lost me. But the whole point is that, if you're doing it for self-seeking attitudes, then you're missing it. Again, back to the Pharisees and the healing on the Sabbath, you're missing the point. You're looking very closely, but you aren't seeing what you're intended to see.
At the same time, isn't there a lesson there? The Lord is loving us. He's doing everything to make us feel comfortable in His presence, appreciate what He's done. Isn't that the lesson also? That when we respond with His kind of love, not that we can pay it, but that we love Him as He loved us. Isn't that the lesson?
Yes, certainly. Certainly. I mean, that, He is looking for the relationship at it, right? I mean, we'll get to that in the very next section, that God's party is going to be full. Right? There's not going to be empty seats, right? But the invitation's out there. It's up to us ultimately to respond in kind with love. So, starting in verse 15, someone's at the party, and my take on this, just reading of it, naturally is it got quiet. That it got quiet after the whole Sabbath healing. It got quiet after Jesus kind of turns this conventional wisdom on its head, with clear indications about who He's talking to and why He's talking to them, right? Because He says, I saw you jockeying for position around the table, and then that's why I said what I said. And so it gets quiet, it gets awkward, and somebody is just, says one of those, I'll rattle off a religious statement here I know everybody can agree with. Blessed is he who's going to eat bread in the kingdom of God. Yeah, okay. That's true, I suppose. But Jesus, again, he doubles down. He's not going to back off of what he's been talking about. Like, okay, I know you gave me the out. Thanks, fella, to get out of here with this eating bread in the kingdom of God. But I'm going to take it and I'm going to double down on it and make it more personal yet again. Back in chapter 13, we looked at those two kind of grandiose statements that were broad, that were meant, their intention seems to be to deflect from personal. Like, around the tragedies, the question was, why did this happen to all those people? The question should be, why didn't it happen to you? Or with the question, are only a few going to be saved? No, that's not the question. Are you going to be saved, right? Taking these broad questions that are outwardly applied, and Jesus turns it back on to self. The same thing here. There's nothing wrong with the statement in itself. Yeah, blessed is the persons and the ones who are going to eat bread in the kingdom of God. But you're just making this broad statement to get out of an awkward situation because you don't want to face the reality. So Jesus turns it again very personally and makes the kind of ultimate question is, are you going to be at that party? You know, blessed are those people who get to go to it, but are you going to get to go to it? Are you going to respond to that call? So he uses this parable of the Great Supper. A certain man gave a great supper and invited many, and he sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, "Come, for all things are now ready." All right, so real quick before we dive in further there, they'd previously already been invited and seemingly accepted, right? That's key to understanding this particular story, right? This group of people had already received their invitation in the mail. They'd sent it back, RSVP, yes, I'm going to be there. All right, and so now it's party time. The master of the feast has got everything ready. He sends out his servant to tell everybody it's time to come now. But he goes out and he delivers the message, all things are ready, and what happens?
You start making excuses.
Yeah, they start making excuses for why now they can't come, right? I like to take your invitation when I got nothing better. But as soon as something better comes up, I plan to do that. So they start making excuses here. And there's three categories of them. And interestingly enough, all of these excuses are kind of rooted in a legal framework about how to get out of war. Back in Deuteronomy chapter 20, you know, if you had just bought a piece of land, you didn't have to sign up for the army because you need to take care of that. You just built your house. Or if you just got married, which would be the last one here, you know, you need to spend your time at home for at least a year with your wife before you go off and you sign up for war, because what if something happens while you go do that? That's in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 5 through 7 kind of elaborate on that. So I think that's just interesting that he uses these three excuses. But that's just what they are. They're excuses, right? And even in the framework of this particular parable, you know, the first guy says, no, I just bought some land, I got to go check it out. Oh, why do you have to go check out something that you just bought? Can't wait 12 hours to go look at it the next morning. Maybe it would make sense if, like, hey, I'm thinking about buying and I got to check it out before someone else scoops it up. But this is deal's done. I just want to go see what I bought. Same thing with the ox in the next one. You know, I already bought them. I just got to go test them out now. Shouldn't you have done that a couple of days ago before you actually shelled out the coin to get these oxen? And the last one from I just got married standpoint, I guess it was just a male-only event and his wife can't come, or maybe she wasn't on the original RSVP. But same thing holds true, right? You'd already RSVP'd yes to the party. Why'd you do that? You know, instead of knowing the dates and committing to coming, and now you're not able to. So that's just what they are. They're excuses. They're just reasons to get out of something that you'd already committed to. And I think, obviously, overarchingly, from an analogy standpoint, this is representative of Israel, right? You'd accepted the covenant relationship that I extended to you. We entered into this agreement, and you failed to live up to it. And here I am yet again, right in front of you, again, going back to the Sabbath healing. You saw what happened. You were watching closely. You just don't have an answer for what you're seeing and what you're experiencing. It's the same thing here. They got invited. They said yes. They entered into that agreement, but I don't want to now. Not gonna happen. So the servant went back to the master, and it says that the master became angry and said, okay, well, we're gonna rectify this. We're not gonna have an empty party here. So go out to the streets and the lanes of the city and start bringing in the poor and the maimed, the lame and the blind, right? That's already representative of what Jesus has done, right? He's gone to the rulers right in front of them and extended this invitation. Come to this feast that I'm offering. And they're making excuses. They're trying to find reasons to get out of it. They're trying to watch him closely, to set up traps, just to get rid of him and not have to deal with him anymore. So Jesus turns to this group of people, the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind, because they're in a situation where they can value what Jesus is offering. I know Brad's thrown up the Durrell quote several times, you know, that these people are in a position because of their life circumstances to understand not having value and what it means when you get even a little bit thrown your way. The Pharisees were in the exact opposite position. They're only looking for more self, and so then you've got blinders on to what's actually happening around you. But these people, of course, respond to the invitation. And so the servant says, yeah, we've done that, but we've got all of those. We've got everybody that responded in that particular people group. So the master says, okay, we'll go out into the highways and the hedges and compel them to come in. What's that in reference to? Right, the maimed, the blind, they were still inside the city, right? They were just the people you didn't necessarily want at your party to begin with, but we've got them now. So what's now we're going out to the highways and the hedges. Yeah. People that are just passing through, the people who are not part of the community. What's that in reference to in the broader picture? Yeah, the Gentiles, the bringing in of the Gentiles, right? That those people, and that's how he finishes out the statement, verse 24, that none of those who were originally invited are going to get the taste of my supper. But those people who are completely outside, not just the fringes of the society within this Israelite community, but beyond that, we're getting in the people that are just completely outside of it, the Gentiles and those who didn't even know the master's second hand. Like, you're just driving down 65 and someone waves you down, right? Says, I'm going to a party tonight. Do you want to come? I don't even know you. And I definitely don't know this party or whoever's throwing the party that you're inviting me to, but that's what's happening here, right? Is that the invitation's going out to people that have no connection with the master, not even a second-hand connection. So they're going to have to be encouraged and act along of why this makes sense, why this is going to be a party you're going to want to be at. And I think there's obvious connections.
Josh, I just thought of those as the thieves and the robbers that hide in the hedges on the highways.
Sure.
And I mean, if you're going to invite
Yeah.
somebody that far outside, it's open to anybody.
I guess you take the analogy even that further. There's stuff that we got to be on the lookout for, but the invitation's extended to them, right? And that's the thing too. But I think in framing of this analogy, the servant is having to go out and try to get as many people to come as will come. But the invitation is openly extended. But the response is, or the question ultimately is, will you respond to the invitation? These people accepted, said yes. So I think that's even something to take from there. You can say yes and not go because you ultimately decide not to go. Right? So that's something to keep in mind as well. The last section, just got a couple minutes here. After dealing with this party and the Pharisees and ruining it for them, that great ruler, the Pharisee, had a good party plan, but came to nothing. It says, now he turns to the great multitudes who were going along with him. And he turned and he said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Lest after he has laid the foundation, he's not able to finish. All those who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going off to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to go out and meet him who's coming against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. All right, so these great multitudes, now this is where Jesus turns his attention. So we're not dealing with the Pharisees here anymore. We're dealing with people that are actually following Jesus. And apparently this is en masse, so even broader than the original 12, or those closest to him. And what's Jesus doing? Where is he journeying right now? I've already said. What's going to happen when it gets to Jerusalem? Does this journey get even better when we get to Jerusalem? It's all great following Jesus now. I got a great teacher, great wisdom that's being doled out. I'm meeting people like me that have kind of been on the outside. But what's going to happen when you get to Jerusalem? It's going to hit the fan, right? I mean, it's going to be bad. So what's going to happen when you're experiencing that for the first time when we get to Jerusalem? So Jesus lays out what the cost of discipleship is in advance. You need to know what some of the things that you're signing up for. But again, I made this point at the beginning. It's more than just evaluating the cost and saying, yeah, this is going to be hard, or yeah, this is going to be difficult. You can only value something if you look at the other side of the transaction, right? You can only value any deal if what am I giving up and what am I getting in return, right? By the end of the story, what we're getting is a bargain. right? It costs a lot. It costs everything we have, but you get umpteen times more ultimately in return. And that's the overarching point. But he makes it in very harsh terminology, and says, you hate your father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, even yourself. And the word hate there, obviously we've seen Jesus speak in hyperbole before in Luke. It doesn't mean that you're actually just supposed to scorn every relationship that you have. The concept from a Hebrew perspective in hating actually just means to love less. Right? So it's talking about a hierarchy or positioning of where your love is supposed to be focused. It's supposed to be focused with ultimately God and Christ at the top. Same Hebrew words here in Genesis chapter 29 when it talks about Jacob loving Rachel more than Leah. In the very next verse it says, but Leah was hated. Right? So it's not that she's actually hated, it's that there's a ranking of where this love is supposed to be. And so Jesus is saying the same thing here. You're supposed to hate, i.e. rank me ahead of your father, your mother, your wife and children, brothers, sisters, and yourself. And he's talked about already back in chapter 12, the division that he came to bring. This is a real thing that you're going to have to come to grips with at some point. Then he uses this analogy real quick about building a tower and going to war. And towers in that day and age, one of two things. I know when we went to Italy several years ago, what was it, San Giacomo? Something like that. Something like this. But they would build these towers to show off and compare themselves against everyone else in their towers. How embarrassing would it be if you set to make the biggest tower in the city and you can't even get past the foundation? How embarrassing is that? The other thing towers might be used for is from a protection standpoint, building a wall and protection around your vineyard. What good is it if you only get it halfway done? Like, all you've done is waste money to protect something that it actually can't protect because it's not finished. It's the same thing. You've got to sit down and consider these things. That's the ultimate point. Count the costs and consider what you're after. That's how he closes ultimately, is he who has ears, let him hear. Analyze the situation for what it really is. Where are you ranking your hierarchy? Where are you placing me and God in contrast to jockeying for position, in contrast to things of self-serving nature? Where does God fall? Because everything else is ultimately worthless. Thanks for your attention. We'll do chapter 15 on Wednesday.